Good morning and welcome to our Silver Anniversary Special. 12 months and 24 events later, here we are, one big close-knit family. Your unwavering support and encouragement has been our greatest strength and kept us and our local teams motivated through these hard times. Thank you all so much. We do apologize for our Egypt event, which unfortunately could not go ahead on the 5th of May due to unavoidable circumstances. It has been rescheduled for a later date, so you will get to visit it in not too distant future. Travel has restarted, well, at least on paper. The UK Green List is as perplexing as Turkmenistan. Some of the countries on the list are not yet accepting travelers, and a couple of others, we don't even know how to get there. Anyhow, in the next few weeks, places will open up and we will be spoiled for choice. Go for it and take advantage of our sale. Now, this one is real. It's not just on paper. We have a real sale going on. We are offering £100 per person, or for those of you booking in USD or euros, 130 USD per person or €110 per person discount on all tours booked until 31st of May. This, along with our flexi deposit offer, does make it all the more attractive. Today, we head back to Central Asia and another one of the Silk Road countries, Turkmenistan, the enigmatic stan of Central Asia, once the heart of the Islamic world and an important part of the ancient Silk Road. Though today it is one of the least visited countries in the region and something of a mystery. A country with some bizarre laws, which were put in place by the eccentric former president for life. The country observes national holidays like Carpet Day, Turkmen Horse Day, Melon Day, and so on. The first president abolished the Turkmen word for bread for it to be replaced by his mother's name, Kurban Sultan. Transport yourself back in time to the Parthian Empire, among the ruins and shrines of Nisa Fortress and oasis city of Merv. And then fast forward to the surreal white marble sheeted capital of Ashgabat. Travel into the immense and barren landscape of the Karakum Desert and come face to face with the gates of hell at Darwaza Flaming Crater. Everything about this country is unique and waiting to be explored. Artem Saribakov was born and raised in Ashgabat and is the head of Travel the Unknown's Turkmenistan operations. As a boy, he traveled around all of former USSR with his family. Later, he got to know more of Turkmenistan with his football team while playing matches across the country. This provided him the opportunity to explore more of his own country and resulted in Artem joining the tourism industry in 2005 as an English and Russian language tour guide. A qualified philologist, he studied English language and literature at the Turkmen State University and worked as a translator and English text editor at the State Institute of Cultural Heritage before joining the travel industry. He still plays football and in his free time loves to read books ranging from history to global finance and is especially interested in books about the Great Game period and its events. As always, post-presentation and before the question answers, I shall give you a very quick overview of our tours. Please send any questions through to me via the chat box so that I can take them up during the question answer round. Thank you. Now, let's turn the spotlight on Artem. Over to you, Artem.
Thank you, Sunita. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone attending. Actually, I'm very honored, feel very honored to welcome you to Turkmenistan today, even if just online. So speaking, as Sunita mentioned, I've been fascinated about the Great Game events and everything related to the Great Game since I first heard or read about it. And actually, just one of the people who made the term Great Game popular was Rudyard Kipling, who is also one of my favorite writers. And I felt like just using one of his poems, which is probably familiar to everyone, Six Serving Men, as a kind of plan for the presentation, because I believe just throughout my previous experience, I've used it many times, just that those serving men, which are namely what, why, when, how, where, and who, are very great assistants just to discovering any subject. So, and actually the presentation will be based on those serving men. So We will start with welcome. First of all, welcome to Turkmenistan, and we will start with the first two, which are what and where. Basically, what is Turkmenistan and where it is located. So, looking at the map of Central Asia, we can see that Turkmenistan is located between the Caspian Sea on the west and the famous Oxus River or Amu Darya, as we know it now, on the east, which serves a natural border with Uzbekistan. To the north, Turkmenistan shares border also with Kazakhstan, to the south with Iran and Afghanistan. And by the Caspian Sea, Turkmenistan also has border with Azerbaijan across the Caspian Sea, with Azerbaijan and Russia. The total area of Turkmenistan is 488,000 square kilometers, which is approximately of the same size as Sweden or Spain. But due to the fact that 80% of the country is occupied by the Karakum Desert, which is of approximately the same size as the whole of the UK. So the population of Turkmenistan is quite low, only about 6 million people. Geography of Turkmenistan is also quite diverse, offering us an opportunity to bathe in the sea, walk in the mountains, travel in the desert. Turkmenistan is the so-called presidential republic, with the division of power in the country into the usual branches: executive, legislative, and the judicial. The head of the executive branch is the president, who is elected by direct vote. The national economy of Turkmenistan relies on mostly two important branches, which is oil and gas industry or hydrocarbon, which makes up about 70% of the national income, and agriculture, roughly 10%. So, why visiting Turkmenistan? Turkmenistan, as I mentioned, is quite a lucky country to have various kinds of landscapes. So 80% of the country is occupied by the Karakum Desert, which is just spectacular in the spring. We have mountains on the south, serving border with Iran, Caspian Sea on the west, and all of the cities in Turkmenistan are basically located in the oases, smaller oases, clinging either between the desert and the mountains on the banks of a river or a canal. Historically, Turkmenistan was very well located on the so-called Silk Road. So looking at the map, you can see that at some, especially at some stages, Turkmenistan really was located between the west and the east. And at some points, just both worlds, I would say, would meet here. And as a heritage from the Silk Road times, and actually long before even the Silk Road formally appeared, Turkmenistan still has a lot of architectural and historical sites. So let's start with the so-called World Heritage Sites, the three most important cultural sites in Turkmenistan. The first one is Old Nisa, one of the earliest capitals of the huge Parthian Empire since roughly 2nd century BC and up to the mid-3rd century AD. Parthia played a very important role in the development of the Silk Road, because it was the first huge and influential player who actually introduced some kind of patronage of the Silk Road trade. And during the Parthian period, a lot of the later period caravanserais, watchtowers, cities, and trade centers were not only built all along the trade routes, but were also very well protected, and caravans were even provided armed guards to travel from one place to another. Why is Old Nisa an old heritage, World Heritage Site? So first of all, because of its role. And if you get a chance to visit Turkmenistan and actually see Old Nisa, you will see that it is located in a very atmospheric place. So between the mountains on the south and the desert to the north. And it actually offers a beautiful opportunity to see the area around and feel how residents and defendants of the fortress, what actually defendants of the fortress would feel centuries ago. Old Nisa has been excavated since the early 20th century, And up to the present moment, various archaeological missions from different countries visited and work at the site in spring and autumn up to now. But due to various reasons, only 30% of the whole site has been excavated. But what the archaeologists and researchers discovered there was quite stunning. Here we can see reconstruction images of the so-called throne hall. It's a part of the complex within the Old Nisa and the temple. So actually, Old Nisa was not a city, but as scholars and historians call it, it was the residence of Parthian kings. Actually, the very heart of the authority of the Parthian Empire, which was a rival to Rome in early centuries AD, especially in the first century AD, when they clashed with one another. Excavations discovered different, various interesting finds, traces of the sculptures of four-bladed columns, and the throne hall is also a special place because here on the image we can see in the center a sort of carpet. And at the carpet, the Parthian king would be receiving delegations and foreign ambassadors sitting on a throne made of ivory. And at the same time, the whole room was in a semi-darkness, and the only source of light was a window on the roof. And the king would be sitting on his throne in the rays of light coming from above. Just adjoining to the throne hall is the so-called temple, a private temple of the royal family. At that time, the official religion of Parthia was Zoroastrianism, and this is where Zoroastrian ceremonies for the royal family were organized. And in the niches that we can see at the wall above the ground level, we can see the traces of the Parthian gods, which look like Greek gods, but had Parthian Zoroastrian names actually. Because of this reason, the culture of Parthia is the so-called Hellenistic culture, so a heir to the empire of Alexander the Great. Parthia, though inhabited by local, originally Persian settled population, very close to the modern-day people of Iran, for example, and at the same time, a part of the population was nomads from the desert. The culture of the Parthia was very strongly influenced by the culture of Greece. And we can see some of the finds from Old Nisa. For example, statue of Athena, a little figurine actually, even though on the picture it looks quite impressive and detailed, it's only just a couple of centimeters in size. Coins that were discovered at Old Nisa also give us a good idea of the dual nature of the culture. So early Parthian kings, they actually the founder of the Arsacid dynasty, the person who established the Parthian Empire, taking the power over from the Persian rulers, and later period kings Mithridates, which looks like Greek, a typical Greek person. Another interesting artifact from Old Nisa is the so-called ossuary. So as Parthian religion, official religion of Parthia was Zoroastrianism, people were not buried in the ground, but actually after some very complicated ceremonies, the clean bones were collected and then buried in these ceramic vessels. This was like a little mausoleum for the bones. A few more interesting artifacts. For example, we can see Parthian rhytons. Rhytons are drinking vessels used for ceremonies, for special religious ceremonies, known all over the ancient East and the Mediterranean, but only in Parthia somehow the ivory rhytons were made of ivory. And knowing that there haven't been elephants in Turkmenistan, at least in more or less civilized history, this shows that, and also we remember that the throne of the king was also made of ivory. We can assume that there was cultural connection with India. So that's where supposedly those horns, elephant beams and ivory came from. Another figurine is that of a Cupid. Here we can see also Greek influence. And another good example of the dual nature of the Parthian culture is the statue of the so-called Rodoguna. According to the local information, local tradition, I would say, Rodoguna was a daughter of a Parthian king, while at the same time looking at it, you can see that it resembles quite strongly Venus.
Artem,
Yeah,
Artem, sorry to interrupt. We have a request. Could you speak a little louder, please? Some of
okay.
our clients are not able to hear you very well.
Is it better?
Is it better, everyone?
Or maybe speak slower? Sorry.
No, I think you need to be louder, please. You
Okay,
might need to
okay,
turn
all
up
right,
the volume.
all right, all right. So,
Thank
uh,
you.
the statue of Rodoguna, which looks very much like Venus or Aphrodite. So the next World Heritage Site in Turkmenistan is ancient Merv. It was the first World Heritage Site in Turkmenistan, but at the same time, it's quite a unique place for archaeology lovers and a real paradise for the professional archaeologists. Uh, so first of all, looking at the map of the site, we can see why they call it the so-called wandering or traveling city. Uh, Unlike many other places, unlike many other archaeological sites, ancient Merv, different cultural and historical stages of ancient Merv, they did not develop on the ruins of the previous ones, but rather the city expanded from its original location, and the oldest of the cities of Merv, we can see here it's Erkala, dating back to the 6th century BC. So in the course of the natural development of the ancient society, all the city was no longer capable of fulfilling the needs of the rulers or its functions, actually. And then a new city was built next to it, or just older city was extended. Erkala dates back to the 3rd century BC and was an active city until the 9th century AD, when during the medieval period, another city of Merv appeared, and the summit of this city was under the famous Seljuk dynasty, ruling since the 11th century and up to the mid 12th century. Then, after the hordes of Genghis Khan destroyed a lot of cultures and basically the whole mode of life in Central Asia, ancient Merv stops being a city up to the 15th century, when a new city of Merv appears just a couple of kilometers to the south as the Timurid city. And the last addition to ancient Merv was made in the 18th century as Bayram Ali Khan Kala. And apart from the archaeological nature of ancient Merv, we can still see some of the standing monuments. And ancient Merv is also a special archaeological site in Turkmenistan and Central Asia because it's quite vast. The total area of the protected historical territory is 1,200 hectares. But the actual historical land is much, much bigger. So apart from the history, ancient Merv still presents some architectural examples from different historical periods. For example, here on the picture, we can see the so-called köşks, a typical architecture of the pre-Arabic period. Basically, this building was an estate of a wealthy landlord. Merv also took active part in different historical events which were significant for the whole ancient and medieval world. For example, a few kilometers from the ancient Merv, the last Sassanid ruler, Yazgad, was murdered, and actually this marked the beginning of the Arabic rule, not only in Central Asia, but in the huge regions of huge parts of Eurasia. And at ancient Merv, we can see this complex of the Ashab mausoleums. Ashabs were the two men leading Arabic troops And actually, the word ashab means messengers or companions of the prophet. The two men led the army, and actually they were canonized in Merv because they managed to convert local population to Islam by word rather than the sword. And this complex serves some kind of religious center of a big cemetery. But the height of ancient Merv, actually the summit of its culture, the peak of its glory, happened under the Seljuks. And some part of the Seljuk history, Merv really was the capital of a huge Seljuk empire. We can see on the west reaching the Mediterranean, and on the east only limited by high mountains of Tibet, and occupying huge areas, actually the whole Muslim world of that time, including the most important cities such as centers in Iran, all of the Central Asian glorious cities such as Bukhara, Samarkand, and others, Baghdad, and even most of the Turkey. And actually the rise of Seljuk and the spread of the Seljuk Empire marked penetration and marked the beginning of the domination of the Turkic population and the Turkic culture in the present-day Turkey. Before that, this was a typical Greek area with the Greek culture and actually some kind of remnants of the huge Roman Empire, the Byzantines. And in ancient Merv, we can still see some marks of the Seljuk period. For example, the biggest structure in ancient Merv is the mausoleum of Sultan Sanjar, the last of the greatest Seljuk rulers. Under Sultan Sanjar, the Merv was referred to as the queen of the world, because it was not only a significant center of power or political influence, but it was also a center of culture, a center of knowledge, a center of religion, and of arts as well. And under Sultan Sanjar, a lot of well-known cultural figures worked and lived in Merv. For example, Omar Khayyam. We know, most of us heard about this famous Arabic poet, about this famous Arabic man as a poet, author of numerous rubayats. But at the same time, he was a well-known and a renowned, actually, and distinguished mathematician and astronomer. And in observatories of ancient Merv, he compiled his astronomical tables and even created a calendar that was used at that time. And even looking at the mausoleum itself, if we see the drawings, we could literally read mathematical proportions of the building, all of the arches, location of the arches, just the lines of the dome. They're all very well calculated. And here at the picture, we can see the decoration of the inner dome, and it's reinforcement reefs, but forming in the center an octagon star with 8 points. And later on, if you visit present-day Turkmenistan, you can see the star in many places in Ashgabat, because this is a symbol of the Turkic tribes, a symbol of the Oghuz tribes, and Turkmen people and the Seljuks were a part of this big confederation of Turkic tribes inhabiting Central Asia, and octagon star was their symbol. And actually, in modern mosques in Turkmenistan, there's always 8 gates, because this number 8, it symbolizes the belief that a soul of a person reaches paradise in the afterlife going through 8 gates. And this number symbolizes actually those 8 gates, gateways to the paradise. The third World Heritage UNESCO site in Turkmenistan is Konya-Urgench. Initially, Konya-Urgench was the capital of a small historical region of Khwarezm, a part of which, half of which actually is in the present-day Uzbekistan. We can see Amudarya basically shares the region into, divides the region into Uzbekistan, present-day Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. And Later on, with the decline of the Seljuk Empire, Khwarezm Shaks really were heirs of the Seljuks. And in the course of their rule, we can see that just a small historical region grew into a huge empire, the biggest Muslim country of its time. Visiting Konyorgench, we get a chance to see unique architectural examples. And actually, it is quite interesting to visit Konyorgench before going to Uzbekistan, because some of the most beautiful, most intricate decorative elements, architectural elements that you would see in Turkmenistan, you can see their early, in Uzbekistan, we can see their early form in Konyorgench. Konyorgench is most famous for its conical domes. Here we can see mausoleum of Il Arslan, dating back to the mid-12th century. It's already a sort of form of a cone, though not perfectly circular cylinder. And then the mausoleum of Tekesh, late 12th century, much bigger than the earlier mausoleum, with a perfect conical dome, and at the same time with a portal. So we can, visiting Konyorgench, we can basically visit some kind of, like on a travel on a time machine, and trace the development of architecture of the place, which also influenced the development of the architectural thought in the whole of Central Asia afterwards. So Konyorgench is also quite an interesting site, because it gives us a chance to visit architecture, the two mausoleums of the pre-Mongol period. And but at the same time, when the Mongol invasion in many places was the end basically of life, like in ancient Mer, for example, it didn't destroy the development of Konyorgench, though of course it was not a positive event, but somehow the city managed to survive, and actually another and rise like phoenix under the subsequent Mongol rulers. And for example, the landmark of Konyorgench, of architectural site of Konyorgench and historical site, is the minaret of Kutluk Timur, which used to be a part of the central cathedral mosque of the city. Initially, it was about 70 meters high, and built in the early 14th century. This was the tallest structure in Central Asia. And speaking about architectural elements, we can see here the so-called stalactites, earlier form of stalactites, which we can encounter in many architectural and historical sites in Uzbekistan, in more intricate forms, smaller in size, finer maybe, colored in gold, yellow, green, all kind of colors that people could develop at that time. But at the same time, here we can see a more original, earlier form of it. And just like ancient Merv, Konyorgench was also a significant center of science of its time. And so actually looking at buildings is a good way to guess about what kinds of the level of knowledge was in the city. This is the photograph of the inner dome of the mausoleum of Turabek Khanum, mid 14th century. And looking at the dome itself, decoration of the dome, we can see what artists wanted to present as some kind of constellations. These are floral designs, but they symbolize constellations. And at the same time, there are 365 floral patterns, floral images on the surface of the dome, symbolizing 365 days a year. Just below the inner dome, below the inner dome, at the foundation of it, we can see 24 arches, which symbolize 24 hours a day, and 12 bigger arches, just referring to 12 months a year. So we can, even looking at the buildings, we can see that just the thought and astronomy was quite a significant part of life of that time. And Konyorgench was also a center of science. And for example, we all use computers, and we can now communicate using computers, mobile phones, and all of those electronic devices. The software of all of those electronic devices functions using algorithms. And actually, the word algorithm is a derivative of a name of a local scientist, Al-Khwarizmi, who was a well-known mathematician, a distinguished mathematician, known for some kind of advancement of equations. He discovered equations of the first and second category. And actually, his name Al-Khwarizmi, which meant born in Khwarezm, became the name for algorithms. And at the same time, Al-Khwarizmi was also the first to introduce the word algebra while writing about mathematical calculations. And later on, algebra became what we know now as algebra. And speaking about capitals of historical empires, we of course cannot avoid speaking about the modern capital of Turkmenistan, Ashgabat, or as residents of the city very proudly call it City of Love or a Pearl of Central Asia. You can see that it's quite an extraordinary city for this region. Even though it is quite young compared to historical sites, formerly starting starting from the end of the 19th century, it is even more younger because of the historical events. And after the earthquake of 1948, the historical city was literally removed from the surface, and the present-day Ashgabat was rebuilt after that. And beginning with the independence period, it's entirely changed its appearance to become a real capital of an independent country. And you can now see Ashgabat, a city with wide streets, beautiful parks, and a city of fountains as well. For example, this street, it's a sort of the longest fountain chain in the world. So the division between the lanes is made up with fountains. Continuing this kind of theme, we can see another fountain which marks some kind of entrance to the international airport of Ashgabat. This is the biggest fountain complex in the world, and it's in the Guinness Book of Records for that. And apart from the fountains, we can see some other beautiful architecture which combines some traditional elements. This is the Independence Monument of Turkmenistan, and the foundation of it, if we look at this semi-sphere, it's a sort of the idea of creating this foundation was borrowed from the traditional Turkmen yurt. And it symbolizes a sort of home of the Turkmen nation, a home of the family. And at the same time, we can see a 91-meter column and a 27-meter peak, which symbolize the day the independence was declared, 27th of October 1991. But at the same time, we can see that the style of the column is just very close to the style of the architecture of the Parthian and the Greek periods. So architecture of the present-day Ashgabat is actually a mixture of the traditional architecture of Central Asia and Turkmenistan and some kind of modern motifs as well. But Ashgabat, still a few more interesting buildings. When you arrive in Ashgabat by air, you already start seeing some extraordinary nature of the city. This is the international airport of Ashgabat. So from the air, it will look like the Independence Monument, we've just seen. But at the same time, the main hall, the main terminal of the airport is the biggest falcon in the world. It's a symbol of the Turkmenistan airline. And another interesting structure, which is the Olympic Stadium of Ashgabat. In 2017, Ashgabat hosted the Asian Indoors and Martial Arts Games. And this Olympic Stadium was built just to host the main events of the games. And we can see it's decorated with a head of a horse, which is the biggest head of a horse in the world. And Turkmen culture, Turkmen horses have been famous, the Akhalteke horses have been famous for long, long ago. And the first mentioning of those horses can be found in the so-called Chinese chronicles, depicting those horses as Nicean or Parthian horses. And it was mentioned that some of the merchants from China was given an order from the emperor to bring the horses from Parthia to China, those winged horses, divine horses, or heavenly horses, as they were called throughout the history. So apart from the historical sites and the cities, Turkmenistan can also offer extraordinary natural sites. And of course, those people who has already been to Turkmenistan, or those who have read about Turkmenistan, they cannot pass by the so-called Darvaza craters, which are becoming a sort of the main landmark, the main natural landmark of the country. Located in the very heart of the Karakum Desert, this crater, actually there are three craters, one with mud, another with water, and the third one with the fire, all bubbling with gas coming out from the underground. So this is a big gas field, and as I mentioned, the main branch of the Turkmen economy is oil and gas industry, and so there's a lot of gas in Turkmenistan, and here we can literally see it. It's a beautiful site that formed in 1959 during the exploration of the gas in the desert. And a gas exploration gas rig was built in the desert, and while drilling for gas, the drillers happened to reach a cavity under the ground, and then on reaching the cavity, a fountain of gas and water actually went up from the depth and destroyed the rig. And geologists even had to remove the rig to somehow save the structure and also to save the lives of the people. And since then, those craters have been open, have been actually accessible to the visitors. And according to official story, geologists just set the crater in fire in 1972 to avoid gas from leaking and poisoning the air of the nearby villages. And they thought that the amount of gas would be just not big enough, and it would be burnt in the course of several maybe days or weeks. And but it's been burning ever since for more than 40 years. Apart from the Darvaza gas craters, there's other interesting natural sites in Turkmenistan. And moving to the northwest of the country, across the seemingly endless salt-covered steppes, we would encounter almost extraterrestrial landscapes of the so-called Younger Kala canyons and Younger Suf canyons. More than 100 millions of years ago, Turkmenistan, like most of the Eurasian continent, was covered by the ocean-like Sea of Tethys. And actually, these landscapes, the surface of the canyons, is the original bed of that sea. And here we can see some remnants of that sea life and deposits of the sea life forming those intricate structures, intricate natural beauties due to erosion and corrosion. So this is the Younger Kala canyons, the so-called Martian red canyons. And not far from there, just 30 minutes drive away from Younger Kala canyons, we can see the Younger Suf canyons, which are yellowish white, and local people call it Martian-like landscapes. And not far from the Younger Kala and Younger Suf canyons, another just basically hour drive deeper into the desert, we would happen to be in the so-called Bulls canyons, another unusual site with hundreds of huge rocks, some of which are up to 2 meters in size, just scattered on the surface of the ground in a very beautiful setting. And this is also these interesting natural beauties. They were also formed under the influence of wind and rain. And but at the same time, actually, there's various hypotheses as to how they formed, and still no one universal idea. But it's still quite nice to visit them and to trace geological history of the country, not only just the cultural history of the country. And another extraordinary historic natural site in Turkmenistan is the so-called Kuritendak Jurassic Park. In the eastern tip of the country, where Turkmenistan territory meets the territory of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, there is a little village of Kuritendak. And not far from that village, we can see the so-called plateau, Dinosaur Plateau, about 500 meters in length and 200 meters in width. It still preserves traces of the prehistoric creatures, the dinosaurs, who lived over 150 million years ago. Some of the traces are 1.5 meters in size. Some of them are just the size of the human foot. And all in all, on that plateau, we can find about 400 footprints of those dinosaurs. And it's quite interesting that in some part of the plateau, we can not only see just footprints of a walking dinosaur, but actually two dinosaurs with big footprints and small footprints, as if a parents walking somewhere with a child. And here you can see just one of our guides and some kind of scale of the footprint next to a person. And just the distance between the footprints is about 1.5 to 2 meters. Apart from just the footprints of the dinosaurs, this area is simply just a beautiful mountainous area where we can see rural life in the mountains. So Turkmenistan is quite an interesting country because we can see how people live in the deserts, in oases, and in the mountains. And even though it's basically the same Turkmen population, but life in different parts of the country and in different natural conditions is very different. And we can see beautiful mountains and how people live in these mountains. And at the same time, not far from the plateau, we can also visit an interesting Kirigris Grotto, or cave as local people call it. It's a holy shrine, and a lot of local people from all over the country come here to make a wish. And actually we can see the ceiling of the cave are just all covered with those little ribbons which people just throw. We can see a person just throwing a ribbon with a little bit of mud to the ceiling of the cave, and if the ribbon just gets stuck to the roof, it would mean for the person that his or her wish would come true. And mostly people visit such places, Turkmen people visit such places before making some kind of significant step in their life, when they are about to just get married, or to enter an institute, or buy a new house, for example, or just before planning on a new baby. So how and when? How to visit Turkmenistan and when? There's different ways to visit Turkmenistan. One of the common ways is just to enter Turkmenistan, is to visit Turkmenistan on some kind of combination tour with Uzbekistan or with Iran. And it's possible to cross overland from Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan either from Khiva on the north, or from Bukhara on the east, or at the same time from Iran on the south. And it's possible to do it just by a regular transportation on a bus, on a group tour, or in a car on an individual tour. It's also possible to arrive in Turkmenistan or leave from Turkmenistan by the Caspian Sea to or from Azerbaijan. But it's not as popular as other types of travel because there's no schedule for the ferries, and most of them, they just come and go depending on the weather conditions. Caspian Sea is quite shallow, and the harbor of the Turkmenbashi seaport is quite shallow as well. So when there is a storm, just ships and ferries stop coming and going. And as I've already mentioned, just there's also a possibility to visit Turkmenistan by air. And actually, if you arrive in Ashgabat by air, you would already basically start sightseeing because from the air, doesn't matter whether it's a daytime or a nighttime, just landing would give you a perfect opportunity to see a scale of the construction in Ashgabat and to see the architecture of Ashgabat. And here, just next to the wing of the airplane, we can see a beautiful mosque, which is just located at the outskirts of Ashgabat. And actually, traveling to Turkmenistan or from Turkmenistan by air offers very good connections with Europe, for example, via Istanbul, or to other parts of the world, to Australia, via the Emirates, namely Dubai or Abu Dhabi. So, and the last serving man, and the one I believe is the most important, is who. So, who is about the tourists, who like travelers of the past, who like discoverers of the past, or sometimes even like conquerors of the past, are curious enough to cross the half of the world, the half of the globe, just to visit these countries. Another important segment of the who is the local people, who are hospitable, who are just quite generous and open and curious also to, as people used to be centuries and thousands of years ago, to meet people from other parts of the world. And also it's the local people who maintain traditions of the past, but at the same time who some kind of borrow new traditions from the West or develop new traditions. And another maybe more humble part of the who, component of the who, is the travel specialists who go out of the way to make those encounters between the two parts of the world as comfortable, as rewarding, and as memorable as possible. And I would love just to finish my presentation today with a Turkmen saying, which reflects very well the nature of Turkmen people and also a culture that formed throughout thousands of years, the so-called semi-nomadic culture. You know, Turkmen people say, give shelter, visiting a stranger or a traveler, give shelter and food, and then ask questions. So, my dear guests, I would like to welcome you to Turkmenistan and would like to mention that our table is already served and waiting for you. So just be our special guest, become our special guest.
That was really, really interesting and insightful, Artem. Thank you so much. And if you see the comments, attendees have really enjoyed themselves listening to you today. So, and now for maybe not so much such interesting bits, I'm just going to quickly take you all through our tours before we go on to the question answer rounds. So let me bring up my screen. Thank you. There we are. So the very first tour is the standalone tour of Turkmenistan, which is a 9-day Turkmenistan Odyssey tour. It does cover most of the places that Artem took us through on his virtual tour. We have only one group trip every year, and we run it in May. But other than that, it can be done as a private tour. It also works well as an add-on trip to any of the other Central Asian countries or Iran. So you can either combine it with that or Uzbekistan. It works very well. Going on to the multi-country trips, which feature Turkmenistan, we have the 30-day 5-stan Odyssey trip, which covers all the highlights of the 5 stans. We run it during the best months, so it's either spring or autumn, and next year's autumn trips are also already guaranteed. So this is one of our most popular trips for Central Asia, and we can also offer it as a private trip. And then we have the 4-stan tour, which covers the 4 stans excluding Uzbekistan. So here again, we run this trip as a group departure in spring as well as in autumn. And again, you can do it at any point in time as a private tour. And then we have Silk Road through the stans, which takes in the 3 Central Asian countries, which were a very important part of the Silk Road, ancient Silk Road. And here again, the departures are in autumn and spring. And yeah, we are getting bookings for 2022, and that might be a better time. So if you are considering, we would recommend looking at 2022 for your trips. Now let's go through the practicalities here. So it's 5 hours ahead of GMT, and there are no direct flights, as Artem mentioned. So the best way is to travel either via Turkey or the Middle East. Turkish Airlines have very good connections, and it also works well when you're doing a multi-country tour, or even combining it with Iran, because they do fly to all those nations. So it really works very well. You can start in one country and end in another. A letter of invitation is required to travel to Turkmenistan, and we organize it for you. So we send you the required relevant documentation we require from you once you book the tour with us. And this is normally granted closer to the travel date. So once we have the authorization, we send it to you by email. You must carry a printout along with your passport and some nice crisp USD notes, currency notes, to pay as visa fees on arrival at the airport or at the border if you're crossing overland. Turkmenistani menet is the currency, and it's largely a cash economy. So currency can be changed easily at many places, though ATMs are very limited and they are only in Ashgabat, and credit cards are also accepted only by the larger hotels. So again, that makes it a very limited usage. I mean, yeah, so it's best to have cash in hand. Everything is mostly covered in your tour. You might just need little extra cash for buying any souvenirs or tipping and things like that. The best time to travel is April to June or September, October. And do note that there are very strict laws against carrying certain kinds of medication to the country. Things like, strong painkillers which contain morphine or codeine and all are banned. They are treated as narcotic drugs, and under no circumstances can you take them into the country, even if they're prescription drugs for you and you have your doctor's letter. So, but whenever you're planning a trip, we'll send you details and we can discuss it further. So now let's go on to the questions then. And Artem, if you can join us, please. And I do have some questions for you. So let's start with the first one. The domes that you showed in Kenya or Gench, are they painted or tiled?
The domes in can you hear me, Sunita?
Yeah, I can hear you.
The domes in Konya or Gench are both, depending on which dome and even which part of the dome we're speaking, because one dome may have segments which are painted and some other parts which are just tiled. And painting is basically just painting one side of a brick.
Okay. Yeah. So both inside and outside, because you showed the interiors too.
In a dome is tiled, and the outer dome, it has just parts which are glazed side of a brick, and some parts which are also tile work.
Great. Thank you. And how about the cave in Kuritendak? What is it called?
The cave is Kirigris cave. How old is just a difficult question because there's no geological information, but according to local legends, they refer the appearance of this cave to different events, to arrival of the Mongols, according to uh, one story, and according to another story, it's just Prophet Muhammad who somehow sheltered in the cave during one of the hot days.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's good to know. And is there any wildlife in the country?
There is maybe a sparse wildlife in the country due to the conditions, to the harsh conditions of the desert, and probably the most famous of the wildlife in Turkmenistan would be the monitor lizards, which are also called by local people like dragons of the desert. They
Oh,
can
okay.
be as big as just 2 to 3 meters, and
That's scary.
they're quite spectacular to see, but normally just people prefer not to come too close. Uh, uh, Apart from that, there's of course various rodents, porcupines, tortoises, gazelles, quite beautiful goitered gazelles, both in the desert and in the nature reserves at the foothills of the mountains. And at the same time, during the migration periods, especially in early spring and late autumn, we can see lots of hundreds of types of birds uh, traveling across Turkmenistan. And for example, in the Caspian Sea area, we can see millions of pink flamingos, which is just unbelievable experience just to see it. Millions of flamingos basically sticking together in a small area.
Wow. So that's really very, very different. But there is lots to see. It's not, it sounds by the sounds of it. Um, and is horse meat popular as part of the cuisine there, like in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Just because mentioning the Akhalteke horse, I just probably did. It's not possible to mention everything within one presentation, but there's three special animals for Turkmen people. It's the horse, it's a camel, and it's a hunting dog. And in Turkmen language, a horse is at, and the word for father is ata. So father is the most important person for any human being in Turkmenistan. And the word for horse is only one letter different from the word father. So this already indicates the significance of a horse. And at the same time, Turkmen people are the only Central Asian nation who never ate horse meat. And actually eating horse meat in Turkmenistan is like eating human meat, you know, like a human person. And now we can sometimes see wild horses in the desert, but originally they were not wild. They only happen to be, they are only descendants of the horses which were let free in 1970s when Khrushchev, the general secretary of the Soviet Union, issued an order to start producing sausages of horses in Turkmenistan. And what most Turkmen people did, of course, they could not kill their horses or could not let anyone kill their horses. They simply let them free in the desert. And the wild horses that we can see in Turkmenistan now, they're descendants of those refugees.
So there's an interesting history behind it also. Thank you. Could you tell us something about the arts and crafts that are practiced today?
Well, there's various arts and crafts in Turkmenistan, some of which are appearing now. For example, painting becomes more and more popular, and also in some kind of neoclassical version, paintings of traditional Turkmen lifestyle, or family life, and so on and so forth. But the traditional Turkmen arts are most important and most famous of which are carpet making. And it is a known fact that carpets in Turkmenistan are so old that even adoption of Islam had no influence on the making carpet designs. And like most of the other carpet designs in the world, Turkmen carpets are strictly geometric designs. So basically they reflect nature in some kind of symbolic geometric form, geometric expression. Carpets from the north of Turkmenistan, the predominant color on them would be white, because winters are more severe in the north of Turkmenistan. Carpets from the central Turkmenistan, Akhalteke carpets, they will be mostly red, because this is the color of the sun and the color of the desert. And carpets from the west of Turkmenistan, which is the Caspian people, Yomut carpets, people occupying the Caspian shoreline, they will feature geometric designs looking like fishing boats, for example. So Turkmen carpets are really what people call just the soul and spirit of a Turkmen person. And it is still a tradition in villages that a young girl, before she gets married, she makes a carpet for her future father and mother-in-law, and also for her future husband. So in looking at that carpet, they can read basically what she expects of the family life, and actually what, and at the same time, it is a sort of demonstration of the skills of that lady.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So no wonder, when we hear of Carpet Day and Ministry of Carpet, now we understand better as to why it plays such an important role. I mean, it tells you about which part of the country, and like you said, it tells so many stories.
And at the same time, in Turkmenistan, Turkmen people, they have been traditionally basically being born on the carpet, and also buried in the carpet. There's different carpets for the funeral ceremony, and also carpets for prayer rugs, also carpets for just the prayer. So it's really significant part of the culture of Turkmenistan.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Do they follow and speak Turkish there?
Turkmen language is a member of the Turkic family of languages. Turkish is also one of the family of the Turkic languages. And actually, all the Turkmen language would be very close to the present-day Turkish language, because basically Turkish language was brought to Turkey by people from Western Turkmenistan, and actually Ottoman Empire was founded by Osman, who was a descendant of a leader of one Turkmen tribes, actually the grandson of Ertugrul Gazi, who moved from Western Turkmenistan to Turkey in the early 13th century, escaping, running away from encroaching Mongols. There are now a lot of vocabulary similar in Turkmen and Turkish languages, but the grammar is already very different.
Right. Oh, yeah. It kind of then, they have their own versions and things, and it just evolves over a period of time.
And also because living near Iran, for example, we can see a strong cultural influence, linguistic influence from the Persian culture. For example, a lot of settlements along the border, even Ashgabat itself, it's a combination of the two Persian roots, Ashk, beauty or love, Abad, city. So Turkmen language was also influenced by the Persian culture and Persian language.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What are the roads in the country like?
Well, there's different quality of the roads. Roads in cities are quite good, I would say, and especially in Ashgabat and in capitals of provincial capitals of the regions of Turkmenistan. The roads between the cities, they are different in quality. The main highway from Turkmenbashi to Ashgabat and to Turkmenabad, it's not bad. But some of the roads, like from Ashgabat to Dashoguz, it's what many of our guests call rock and roll road, because just as I already mentioned, the population of Turkmenistan is quite sparse, and the road between Ashgabat and Dashoguz, it's more than 500 kilometers. It's not difficult to construct a road with very few settlements on the way, and also in conditions of extreme climate. And it can get up to minus 25 in winter time and up to plus 50 centigrade in summertime. It's very difficult to maintain the road.
Right. So it's recommended to fly if one has to travel those distances. Anything nearby is fine by road.
Fly or just visiting, for example, the craters in the center of Turkmenistan, Darvaza gas craters, we use more prepared 4x4 vehicles, not on a bus, but on a 4x4 vehicles, which makes it safer, more comfortable, and more reliable to travel.
Right. Thank you. And could you remind us of the name of the mathematician again, please, the algebra mathematician you mentioned?
It's Al-Khwarizmi. Khwarizm is the name of the region, half of which is in Turkmenistan and half of which is in Uzbekistan. Basically, present-day Khiva is the capital of Khwarizm region of Uzbekistan. And Al-Khwarizmi, it's Arabic part of the name, which was made up of more than 15 or 20 words, and Al-Khwarizmi was the end of it. Muhammad something, something, something Al-Khwarizmi, which meant born in Khwarizm.
Al-Khwarizmi, yeah. So that, that was interesting. Thank you. And how is the cuisine? Is it meat heavy, mostly, like, or is there good variety for vegetarians too?
Well, the cuisine of the present-day Turkmenistan is quite a big mixture because of the history. First of all, we were a part of the Silk Road, and we borrowed a lot of dishes from other people, from our neighbors. At the same time, the original Turkmen cuisine, it's the cuisine of the nomads from the desert. It's basically meat, some vegetables, very limited number of vegetables, and that's it. But at the same time, speaking about cuisine in Ashgabat, in Mari, in just the places that our guests visit, it's a mixture of European cuisine, Russian cuisine, the Persian cuisine, plov. There's a lot of seasonal vegetables and fruits, and rice and beans and so on and so forth. And even though it's very difficult for us to explain to a traditional Turkmen person what vegetarianism is, so
I can imagine.
So travel agents and places that just work with tourists, they are more and more used to this kind of phenomenon, this kind of extraordinary phenomenon according to local terms. And we would find a way just to cater our dear vegetarian guests and to even make them happy.
And so they're also able to cater to things like, just gluten-free diet or, any specific dietary requirements if the hotels are advised in advance.
Yeah, of course, the hotels are used to doing that, and when some tours which with the pre-booked meals, when we book meals, we just pay attention to every kind of dietary requirement, and the guides are familiar with that. Restaurants are informed about it many times, and before a group of clients arrives, just an hour before guests arrive, we just double check with those places again and again just to make sure that uh, people get just the exactly what they need,
Great, thank you.
or rather don't get what they don't need.
And like in neighboring Uzbekistan, a lot of the restoration work was carried out by the Russians at that time. So is it also true of Turkmenistan?
Well, actually, Turkmenistan has always been in some kind of periphery of the Soviet Union, and Uzbekistan has always been a center of tourism during the Soviet period, and now, of course, it's a center, the main center of tourism in Central Asia, as a kind of continuation of this tradition. And the restoration work that started in Uzbekistan during the Soviet years, it actually reached Turkmenistan much later, when the restorers had many more methods in the hand. And at the same time, most of the sites in Turkmenistan that have been restored, it's ancient Merv, Konyorgench, and Old Nisa, they were restored only after the sites were declared UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and all of the restoration work is closely supervised by the specialists of the UNESCO. So we are more lucky in that respect. And at the same time, a lot of our architectural monuments, not archaeological sites, but architectural monuments, like the standing monuments of ancient Merv or Old Nisa, they are mud brick or mud structures, which requires different kind of approach to restoration. And actually, there's no unified approach to restoration of such structures anywhere in the world. Basically, what the specialists do is just conserve them for the winter period, conserve them with the same kind of mixture of mud and local soil that was used to build them. So this way, our sites are more lucky to be preserved in a more or less original form.
Right, thank you. Um, where can you see the flamingos in Turkmenistan?
Sorry, goes?
Flamingos?
Oh, flamingos. It's just normal migratory period. It's early spring, basically March, early April, and then late autumn, which is late October up to mid-November.
Right, thank you. And do they also produce caviar from the Caspian Sea Sturgeons there?
Well, now there's less caviar available than it used to be in the early years of independence, because
Sorry, it's starting to freeze.
Now it's more produced the official way, and 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, a special Caspian shore to just to fish and produce caviar without the damage. Therefore,
Sorry, we lost you there. You might just have to repeat, Artem.
yeah, just speaking about caviar, now there's less caviar available in Turkmenistan than it used to be in early years of independence,
Yeah.
because it used to be some kind of occupation of illegal fishers without any control. Now it's more organized, and fish farms were built a couple of years ago at the Caspian shore, and all of the caviar and all of the sturgeon meat now comes from those farms. So the amount is less than what it used to be, but at the same time, we make sure our future generations will also have access to this kind of delicacies.
That's important. Yes, true. It should remain. So, and are there any social media sites which are banned in the country?
Well, it's an
Yeah.
interesting question. A lot of Western social media platforms are banned, like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Of course, there's always ways just to get access to them, but at the same time, there's other social media platforms
Oops, we've lost you again.
lo- just lost connection. But at the same time, there's other social media platforms, local ones, Russian-speaking ones, which are available in the country. And at the same time, I think, maybe banning those Western social media platforms is just, I don't see the purpose in that, because most of local people, they simply don't use them.
That's it. I mean, if you have it and, and if it serves their purpose, that's good enough. But yeah.
But there's local social media platforms, and at the same time, it's becoming a kind of problem for parents just dealing with their kids, because more and more often, when I was a boy, we used to play in the garden, in the yards, play all kind of just table games. Now we can see like 10 kids sitting on one bench and communicating with one another via telephone,
Telephone, yeah.
not actually speaking with one another.
I know that's the way it's heading, and it's kind of scary at times what happens to the social skills. So, but I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much, Artem. That was really, really interesting, and it's really helped. You've answered all the questions and for us. And so here's our next event now. We will stay in the region and visit another Silk Road country, Kyrgyzstan. So registration details for future events and recordings of our previous talks can be found on our events page. And of course, you'll also receive a newsletter once it's all set up. Thank you, Artem, for whetting our appetite for Turkmenistan. And thank you all once again for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing you in 3 weeks.
It's a pleasure.
A pleasure to
Welcome
have
to
you here.
Turkmenistan.
I know, wish we could do it in 3 weeks and visit Turkmenistan, but hopefully soon. And in fact, there are quite a few. Before you go, I think just one last question, though we did address that about Persian language. You did mention that, a lot of influence from the Persian language, but do they speak it also today in the country? We had to.
Turkmenistan, even though 80% of the population of the country is ethnic Turkmens, is made up of ethnic Turkmens, there are Persian-speaking people as well, and there's more than 100 nationalities living in Turkmenistan. At the same time, Persian language, is also learned by some of the Turkmen people, business people who deal with Iran, for example. But at the same time, it's a totally different language family. Turkmen language and Persian languages, they are very different. It's like, I don't know, like maybe Turkmen and English, for instance. It's different language groups.
Oh, so the dialect, exactly, it's just kind of evolved and changed.
But at the same time, yes, there's Persian people in Turkmenistan, Baluchi people who speak a sort of dialect of the Persian, and also Kurds, not only living in Turkey, but also in Turkmen, who speak also a dialect of the Persian.
Right. Thank you. So thanks once again. And we look forward to seeing all of you in 3 weeks. Yes, from now on, our events will take place at 3-week intervals. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Enjoy visiting Central Asia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.